Hey guys, we are going to be working on a problem string today. So you're going to need to get a piece of paper and a pencil. So if you need to grab that, go ahead and pause the video and do that quickly and then come on back and restart it up to finish watching. Today we are working on equivalent ratios, and I'm going to give you some problems that kind of sound like division problems, but what you're going to be noticing is we're actually multiplying to get our answers, which is going to look a little bit different. But what we're going to be doing is working with a whole number, and we're going to be dividing it by a fraction, and we're going to be using a ratio table in order to do our equivalent ratios. So our problem today is about walking miles and stuff like that. So the first problem is, if a student walked 1/2 mile in 30 minutes, how fast was he walking? What was his pace per mile? So we are going to set up a ratio table. So we're going to put our minutes, go ahead and write this down, over our miles. And in the problem is said a student walked a 1/2 mile in 30 minutes. So he walked 1/2 mile in 30 minutes. And so what we want to do is take our miles to 1, because it says what was his pace per mile. So in order to figure out his pace per mile, we have to take our miles to 1. So what do we multiply 1/2 by to get 1? You're going to multiply 1/2 by 2, because 1/2 plus 1/2 is 1. So what you do to the bottom, you also do to the top. So you're going to do 30 times 2, which would be 60. So the answer to our question, what was his pace per mile? For 1 mile, it took him 60 minutes. Okay, let's try another one. If a student walked 1/4 of a mile in 5 minutes, how fast was he walking? What was his pace per mile? So it's asking per mile again. So we're going to want to get our miles to 1 in order to figure that out. I'm going to abbreviate miles this time. And if I go back to the problem, it says the student walked 1/4 of a mile in 5 minutes. So I'm going to write 1/4 of a mile and then 5 minutes. And then what do we have to multiply 1/4 by to get 1? 1/4 times 4, because 4/4 equals 1. What you do the bottom, you do to the top. So 5 times 4, which would be 20. So it took him 20 minutes to walk 1 mile. Let's keep going. If a student walked 1/4 of a mile in 8 minutes, how fast was he walking? What was his pace per mile? Minutes over miles. And if I go back to the problem, it was 1/4 of a mile in 8 minutes. Now, just like the last one, you're noticing that 1/4 times 4 is 1. So you're going to multiply 1/4 by 4 to get 1. And then you're going to take your 8 times 4. And 8 times 4 is 32. So it took this student 32 minutes to walk 1 mile. Now, what I'm wanting you to see from these equivalent ratios on a ratio table is that each time we're getting to 1 mile, notice what you're multiplying by. So in 1/2, you're multiplying by 2. Do you see the number 2 in the 1/2 number? It's the denominator. Let's go over here. 1/4. You multiplied that by 4. 4 is the denominator in 1/4. Down here, 1/4, 4 again. I wonder if that always is the case. If we take our denominator and multiply it by that, are we going to get our minutes per mile? Does it always work that way? Let's keep looking at this. Let's set up another problem. Oops. Minutes over miles. And hopefully you're writing this right along with me. And the problem this time is if a student walked 1/5 of a mile in 5 minutes, how fast was he walking? What was his pace per mile? 1/5 of a mile in 5 minutes. Well, look at this. What are we doing with the 1/5? What are we multiplying it by to get 1? That's right, we're multiplying it by the denominator. So you're going to take your top number, also multiply it by that denominator, and 5 times 5 is 25. So it took the student 25 minutes to walk 1 mile. Got one more. If a student walked 1/10 of a mile in 1 minute, how fast was he walking? What was his pace per mile? Let's set up a ratio, minutes per mile. And it was 1/10 of a mile in 1 minute. Well, 10 tenths makes 1 mile, so we're multiplying this by the denominator 10 to get 1. What we do the bottom, we do the top, so you're going to multiply 1 by 10. And 1 times 10 is 10, so it took the student 10 minutes to walk 1 mile. Okay, so we're going to do another problem string tomorrow, and you're going to learn a different way to go ahead and divide your whole number by your fraction. This way you flipped it and you multiplied by the denominator, and tomorrow you'll learn a new strategy. Today, for your work, you will be completing Bridges, pages 264.